I was 24 when this happened, living alone for the first time in Chicago. Not college alone. Not my roommate went home for the weekend alone. I mean genuinely alone. Paying my own bills, working a miserable office job, surviving off microwave meals and cheap beer while pretending adulthood felt normal. The apartment I rented wasn't terrible, but it definitely wasn't luxury either. It was one of those old brick buildings that looked charming during the daytime and deeply unsettling after midnight. The hallways smelled faintly like cigarettes and old carpet. The elevator shook every time it moved. Pipes groaned inside the walls like someone whispering through them. Still, it was affordable. That's all I cared about. The building had 4 floors, and my apartment was on the 3rd. 3B, right near the staircase. Across the hall from me was 3A, occupied by an older woman named Denise who barely spoke but always smiled politely. At the far end of the hallway was apartment 3D, which I'm not even sure anyone lived in. And directly below me on the 2nd floor was apartment 2B. That apartment matters, because nobody was supposed to live there. The landlord told me it had water damage months before I moved in. He said maintenance used it for storage now. I remember because I specifically asked if I'd have downstairs neighbors, and he laughed and said, "Nope, you can stomp around all you want." For the first month, life was normal. I'd get home around 6 p.m., microwave something unhealthy, play Xbox, maybe invite friends over on weekends. Nothing strange happened. Then the noises started. At first, it was subtle. A chair scraping below me.
A cabinet closing.
Footsteps. Not loud enough to alarm me, just noticeable enough to make me pause my game for a second and listen. The weird part wasn't the sounds themselves. It was the timing. Always between 2 and 4 a.m. Always directly beneath my bedroom. The first few nights, I convinced myself it was pipes or the building settling. But one night, I woke up around 3:10 a.m. needing water, and while standing in my kitchen, I heard it clearly. A cough, directly below me. A man's cough. I froze. Then came footsteps. Slow pacing. Back and forth. Back and forth. I stood there listening for maybe 2 minutes before finally texting my landlord. "Hey, thought nobody lived in 2B?" He didn't answer until morning. His reply was short. "Nobody does." That response unsettled me more than if he'd simply said maintenance workers were down there. Over the next week, things escalated. I'd hear drawers opening, metal clanking, sometimes what sounded like a TV playing quietly. One night, I even heard laughter. I started sleeping with my bedroom TV on because silence made the noises downstairs more noticeable. Then came the night I saw him. It was raining hard outside. One of those storms where the whole city feels abandoned. Around midnight, I went downstairs to grab food from a delivery driver because the building buzzer was broken. As I walked back upstairs carrying my bag, I glanced toward the 2nd floor hallway, and I noticed light underneath the door to 2B. Not flashlight light, warm yellow light, like lamps were on inside. I stopped halfway up the staircase staring at it. The landlord had literally told me no one lived there. I don't know why I did this, but curiosity got the better of me. I quietly walked down to the 2nd floor. The hallway was dead silent except for rain hitting the windows near the stairwell. I approached the apartment slowly. The door looked old and scratched up. There was tape residue around the peephole like someone once covered it. And then I heard movement inside. A footstep. My heart instantly started hammering. I should have walked away right then. Instead, I knocked. 3 soft knocks. The movement stopped immediately. Complete silence. I stood there waiting. Nothing. Then slowly, very slowly, the light underneath the door disappeared. As if someone inside had turned off the lamp and was now standing in darkness directly behind the door. I backed away instantly. I went upstairs, locked my apartment, and spent the rest of the night trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. The next morning, I confronted the landlord in person. He looked genuinely confused when I mentioned lights inside 2B. He insisted maintenance hadn't been there in weeks. I even asked if maybe a homeless person broke in. That's when his expression changed. He got quiet for a second before finally saying, "Just stay out of that hallway at night." That answer pissed me off more than scared me. What kind of response was that? I demanded he explain. Eventually, he admitted someone had broken into the apartment months earlier and refused to leave. Apparently, the police removed him after neighbors complained about strange behavior. What kind of strange behavior? I asked. The landlord hesitated. He kept telling people somebody lived in the walls. That sentence sat in my brain all day. That night, I invited my friend Eric over because I didn't want to be alone. I told him everything and he laughed it off immediately. "Dude, it's probably some junkie sneaking in." Honestly, hearing that made me feel better. A junkie was scary, sure, but not nearly as scary as my imagination had become. We stayed up drinking beers and playing Call of Duty until around 1:30 a.m. Then we both heard it. A loud bang from below us. Not subtle this time. It sounded like furniture tipping over. Eric muted the TV. We listened. Another bang. Then dragging sounds. Eric looked at me and said, "Okay, yeah. Somebody's definitely down there." For some reason, that validation made everything feel worse. We debated calling the landlord or police, but eventually curiosity won again. Stupidly, we grabbed our phones and went downstairs together. The hallway to 2B was dark except for faint emergency lighting from the stairwell. And once again, light glowed underneath the apartment door. Eric walked closer than I did. He knocked loudly. "Hey! Someone in there." Silence. Then we heard whispering. Actual whispering. Not loud enough to make out words. Just multiple voices murmuring softly. Eric backed away immediately. "There's more than one person in there." Then something slammed against the inside of the door so hard both of us jumped backward. The whispering stopped. Now there was only breathing. Heavy breathing. Right on the other side of the door. Eric whispered, "Call the cops." Before I could move, the doorknob started turning violently. Not casually. Not someone trying to open it normally. It rattled like whoever was inside was yanking it with both hands. Then came banging. Violent banging. The entire door shook in its frame. We ran upstairs instantly. I nearly dropped my phone sprinting back to my apartment while Eric called 911. And while we waited for police, we heard footsteps running up the stairwell below us. Fast. Heavy. Stopping right outside my apartment door. Silence. Then 3 knocks. Slow. Deliberate. Knock. 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 Neither of us moved. Then came a voice. Quiet. Male. Wrong apartment. I genuinely felt my body go cold. The cops arrived maybe 6 minutes later, though it felt like an hour. They searched the building thoroughly. 2B was empty. No people. No lights. No furniture. Nothing except dust and water damage. One officer even joked that maybe we'd watched too many horror movies. But another officer found something strange. Fresh footprints.
Wet footprints.
Leading from 2B, up the stairs, stopping directly outside my apartment door. After that night, I became paranoid. Every sound made me jump. I started checking my locks repeatedly before bed. Then, about a week later, Denise from 3A stopped me in the hallway. First real conversation we'd ever had. She asked, "You hearing him too?" I felt sick instantly. I asked who she meant. She glanced toward the stairwell before answering quietly. "The man downstairs." I asked if she'd ever seen him. She nodded slowly. Then she said something I still think about years later. "He watches people sleep." I asked what the hell that meant. She explained that months before I moved in. She woke up around 4 a.m. and found a man standing in the hallway outside her apartment, just standing there silently. When he noticed her looking through the peephole, he smiled, then crouched down, and put his eye directly against her peephole from the outside. After that, she called police. That was apparently the same incident where they removed the squatter from 2B. But here's the part that still terrifies me. She said the man they arrested kept insisting someone else lived in 2B with him. Someone he called the tall man. Police thought he was mentally ill. Maybe he was. But 2 nights after my conversation with Denise, I woke up around 3 a.m. needing to pee. As I stepped into my hallway, I froze, because my front door was slightly open, only an inch, but I knew for a fact I'd locked it. Every hair on my body stood up. I slowly approached the door, and that's when I noticed something else. Mud. Fresh mud on the floor inside my apartment. Footprints. Large footprints, leading from the front door toward my bedroom. I didn't sleep there that night. I grabbed my keys and drove to Eric's apartment at 3:30 in the morning. The next day, I moved out temporarily. A week later, police arrested a homeless man hiding in the building's boiler room. Turns out he'd been sneaking into empty apartments for months. He had stolen tools, food wrappers, blankets, and dozens of printed photographs. Photos of tenants, including me. Most were taken through windows from outside. But one photo was inside my apartment, taken from my hallway, while I was asleep in my bedroom. I broke my lease immediately after that. To this day, I still think about something though. The police said the man acted alone. But the night Eric and I heard whispering inside 2B, there were definitely multiple voices. And sometimes late at night, I still wonder if the homeless man was telling the truth about someone else living there with him. This happened to my cousin Amanda in Portland back in 2021. At the time, she was 27 and living with her husband Tyler and their newborn daughter Emma in a rental house outside the city. It wasn't some isolated farmhouse or creepy cabin in the woods. It was a completely normal suburban neighborhood. Sidewalks, streetlights, families walking dogs during the day. The kind of place where you feel safe automatically. That's probably why what happened messed her up so badly. The house itself had 2 floors. Downstairs had the kitchen, living room, laundry room, and garage entrance. Upstairs had 3 bedrooms connected by a narrow hallway. Emma's nursery was directly across from Amanda and Tyler's bedroom. And at the far end of the hallway was a small office Tyler used for work. Like most new parents, they bought a baby monitor with both video and audio. Nothing fancy, just one of those monitors with a camera in the nursery and a portable screen parents carry around. At first, everything was normal. Emma cried. Amanda barely slept. Tyler went to work exhausted every day. Typical new parent stuff. Then strange things started happening with the monitor. The first incident seemed harmless. Amanda was downstairs folding laundry while Emma slept upstairs. Suddenly she heard static from the monitor. Then a man's voice, very faint. She couldn't make out words clearly, but she distinctly heard someone speaking. She assumed the monitor picked up interference from another nearby device. Apparently, older baby monitors sometimes do that. She told Tyler later and he shrugged it off. But over the next 2 weeks, it kept happening. Random static, breathing sounds, soft whispering. Once Amanda heard what sounded like humming. Every time she checked the nursery, Emma would still be asleep peacefully. Then came the night that changed everything. Tyler worked late that evening, so Amanda was alone with Emma. Around 11 p.m., she finally got the baby asleep and went downstairs to watch TV. The monitor sat beside her on the couch. At some point, she must have dozed off because she woke suddenly to static blasting through the monitor speaker. Not normal static. Loud. Aggressive. The kind that instantly spikes your heart rate. She grabbed the monitor and looked at the screen. Emma was still asleep in her crib, but someone was standing beside it. Amanda said at first her brain literally couldn't process what she was seeing. It looked like a tall, dark figure leaning over the crib. She sprinted upstairs immediately.
No hesitación. No weapon.
Nothing, just pure panic. But when she burst into the nursery, nobody was there. Emma was fine, sleeping peacefully. Amanda searched every room upstairs, shaking violently. Nothing. She checked locks downstairs. Everything locked. When Tyler got home, she broke down crying, telling him what happened. He tried calming her down by suggesting maybe the camera glitched or shadows distorted the image. Honestly, she wanted to believe that too, until 3 nights later. This time both of them heard it. They were asleep around 2 a.m. when the monitor suddenly crackled alive on Tyler's nightstand. At first it was static, then breathing, deep breathing, then a voice, clear as day. "She's awake." Amanda said. Tyler instantly grabbed the monitor while she ran into the nursery. Emma was awake, standing in her crib crying. And according to Tyler, while Amanda was out of the room, the monitor camera moved. Not digitally, physically, like someone grabbed it. He watched the camera angle tilt slowly downward toward the crib. Then the feed cut out completely. Tyler searched the entire house with a baseball bat while Amanda called police. The officers found no signs of forced entry, but they did discover something important. The baby monitor had been hacked. Apparently, certain older Wi-Fi monitors had weak security, allowing strangers to access them remotely. The police told them it happens more often than people realize. That explanation should have made them feel better. Didn't, because of one detail. The voice didn't sound electronic. Amanda swore it sounded physically inside the room, and Tyler agreed. Still, they replaced the monitor the next morning and tried moving on. For about a month, nothing happened. Then Tyler left for a 3-day work trip. Amanda almost stayed with family but decided she was overreacting. First night alone went fine. Second night did not. At around 1:40 a.m., Amanda woke up needing water. She checked on Emma first out of habit. The nursery door was cracked open slightly, and inside, Emma's closet door was open too. Amanda specifically remembered closing it earlier. She walked over and shut it, then froze, because she heard movement inside the closet. A soft shifting sound, like clothing brushing together. Amanda backed away, slowly holding Emma. And then, a sneeze. Inside the closet. An actual human sneeze. Amanda ran downstairs carrying Emma and locked herself in the bathroom while calling 911. Police arrived within minutes. And this time, they found someone. A man hiding inside the nursery closet. Not homeless. Not random. A 17-year-old boy from a nearby neighborhood. According to police, he'd been entering houses for months through unlocked windows and garages, mostly to steal things. But in Amanda's case, he became obsessed after discovering the hacked baby monitor feed online. Apparently, he'd been watching the nursery remotely for weeks before eventually entering the house physically. Police found snacks, blankets, and even bottles of water hidden in the attic crawlspace, meaning he'd likely been inside the house multiple times before getting caught. But the worst part came later. During questioning, detectives asked him why he spoke through the monitor. His answer made Amanda move out of that house permanently. He said, "I wanted to see if the baby could hear me." This happened in late October of 2022 in upstate New York. And even now, almost 4 years later, I still cannot sleep in a room with uncovered windows. At the time, I was 25 and working a miserable remote customer service job that drained every ounce of energy from me. My best friend Mason had recently gone through a breakup, and honestly both of us were in a bad place mentally. Nothing dramatic, just that weird stage in your 20s where life feels repetitive and disappointing. So when Mason suggested renting a cabin for a weekend to reset, I agreed immediately. The cabin was part of a small lakeside property about 40 minutes outside a tiny town I'd never heard of before. There were 9 cabins total spread throughout a wooded area around a lake. The cabins weren't super close together either. Each one had enough trees around it to make it feel private. We were staying in cabin 9, and unfortunately, cabin 9 was the farthest from the main road. I remember joking about it when we arrived. Perfect place to get murdered. Mason laughed and flipped me off. The property itself actually looked beautiful during the daytime. Orange leaves everywhere, fog drifting over the lake, wooden docks stretching into dark water. It looked like one of those peaceful autumn wallpapers people use on laptops. The owner was an older guy named Frank. He met us near the office building when we checked in. Friendly enough, but definitely weird in the way older, isolated people sometimes are. Like he hadn't had a real conversation in months. He handed us the keys and said something that didn't register as strange until later. "If you hear knocking at night, ignore it." Mason laughed immediately. Frank didn't. He just stared at us for a second before adding, "Probably just raccoons." Then he walked back into the office. I remember looking at Mason and saying, "Okay, yeah, that dude definitely hides bodies." We spent the first evening drinking beer, grilling burgers outside, and listening to music from Mason's speaker. Honestly, it was exactly what we needed. No city noise, no work calls, no stress, just woods and cold air. By around midnight, we were both pretty drunk and exhausted. The cabin itself was small. One living room with a fireplace, a tiny kitchen, bathroom, and 2 bedrooms connected by a hallway. I took the bedroom closest to the front door. Mason took the back room facing the woods. Before sleeping, I remember standing by the window looking outside. The darkness out there felt different from city darkness. In cities, even nighttime feels alive somehow. You hear cars, sirens, distant voices. Out there, the woods felt dead silent, like the world stopped existing beyond the trees. I closed the blinds and went to sleep. I woke up around 3 a.m. needing to pee. The cabin was freezing now because the fireplace had died down. I remember shivering as I walked into the hallway, and that's when I heard it. Knocking. 3 soft knocks, coming from the front door. I froze instantly. Knock, knock, knock. Not loud, not aggressive, just deliberate. I stood there listening, half asleep, trying to convince myself it really was an animal. Then came a voice. "Hello." A man's voice. Quiet, almost polite. Every hair on my arms stood up. Who the hell would be outside our cabin at 3 in the morning? I walked to Mason's room and pushed his door open. "Mason," I whispered. He groaned. "There's somebody outside." That woke him up instantly. The knocking came again, this time slightly louder. Mason got out of bed and whispered, "Probably Frank." At 3 a.m., neither of us moved. Then whoever was outside spoke again. "I need help." The voice sounded wrong somehow. Not fake exactly, just emotionless, like someone reading lines off paper. Mason slowly approached the living room window beside the front door and peeked through the blinds, then immediately ducked down. The look on his face changed everything. "What?" I whispered aggressively. "There's a guy standing there." "Okay." "He's barefoot." I genuinely felt my stomach drop. Outside temperature that night was close to freezing. Mason looked back through the blinds for another second. Then he whispered, "Dude, I think something's wrong with him." I carefully moved beside the window and peeked through a tiny gap in the blinds. A man stood on our porch, tall, extremely thin, wearing jeans and a dark hoodie. And Mason was right. He was completely barefoot. But the thing I noticed immediately was how still he stood. No shivering, no movement, just staring directly at the cabin door, his head tilted slightly downward, like he was listening. Then he spoke again. "Please let me in." The voice sounded calm. Too calm. Mason whispered, "Call Frank." I grabbed my phone immediately. No signal. Not even one bar. Mason tried to. Nothing. The cabin Wi-Fi had stopped working as well. Outside, the man slowly raised one hand and knocked again. Knock. 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 Then silence. We backed away from the windows. "What do we do?" I whispered. Mason grabbed the fireplace poker. Probably scare him off. That sounded unbelievably stupid to me. But before we could decide anything, the knocking suddenly came from the back door. Both of us jumped, because there was absolutely no way that man could have moved around the cabin that fast without us hearing footsteps on the porch gravel. Now the knocking came harder. Bang, bang, bang. And then another voice spoke. A woman's voice this time. "Please help us." Mason looked at me slowly. There were not two people out there. The woman started crying softly outside the back door. "Actual sabing." It sounded disturbingly real. And honestly, that almost made it worse. Because something deep in my gut kept screaming that opening the door would be a terrible mistake. The crying stopped abruptly. Then silence again. Complete silence. For maybe 30 seconds. And then, running footsteps, circling the cabin outside. Fast. Heavy. One set from the front. One set from the back. Mason swore loudly and grabbed a kitchen knife now too. The footsteps stopped simultaneously. Then both doors started shaking violently. Not knocking anymore. Whoever was outside was trying the handles aggressively. The entire cabin suddenly felt tiny. I remember backing into the kitchen while holding my phone uselessly like it would somehow protect me. The front door handle twisted repeatedly. Then the woman's voice returned. Only now she sounded angry. "Open the fucking door." The change in tone was so sudden and unnatural that it genuinely scared me more than anything else. Mason yelled, "We called the cops." Immediately the shaking stopped. Silence. Then came laughter. Not loud crazy laughter. Quiet laughter. Multiple people laughing outside together. At least 3 voices. Maybe more. And then footsteps slowly moved away from the cabin into the woods. We stayed awake the rest of the night with every light on. Neither of us dared look outside again. At sunrise, we packed our things immediately and drove straight to the main office. Frank looked annoyed more than surprised when we told him what happened. And that reaction pissed Mason off instantly. "You knew something was out there." Frank sighed heavily, then finally admitted that people had reported incidents around Cabin 9 before. Mostly late-night knocking, voices outside, figures watching cabins from the woods. A few guests even claimed someone tried entering their cabins at night. Mason asked if police were involved. Frank nodded slowly, but according to him, nothing was ever found.
No footprints. No campsites.
Nothing. Then he said something that still creeps me out. "You boys are lucky you didn't open the door." I asked him what that meant. Frank looked toward the woods before answering quietly. Couple years back, some drunk guy staying in cabin 9 opened the door for somebody crying outside. He paused. They found him down by the lake the next morning. Mason immediately asked, "Dead?" Frank nodded. The change in tone was so sudden and unnatural that it genuinely scared me more than anything else. Mason yelled, "We called the cops." Immediately the shaking stopped. Silence. Then came laughter. Not loud crazy laughter. Quiet laughter. Multiple people laughing outside together. At least 3 voices. Maybe more. And then footsteps slowly moved away from the cabin into the woods. We stayed awake the rest of the night with every light on. Neither of us dared look outside again. At sunrise, we packed our things immediately and drove straight to the main office. Frank looked annoyed more than surprised when we told him what happened, and that reaction pissed Mason off instantly. "You knew something was out there." Frank sighed heavily, then finally admitted that people had reported incidents around Cabin 9 before, mostly late-night knocking, voices outside, figures watching cabins from the woods. A few guests even claimed someone tried entering their cabins at night. Mason asked if police were involved. Frank nodded slowly, but according to him, nothing was ever found.
No footprints. No campsites.
Nothing. Then he said something that still creeps me out. "You boys are lucky you didn't open the door." I asked him what that meant. Frank looked toward the woods before answering quietly. "Couple years back, some drunk guy staying in Cabin 9 opened the door for somebody crying outside." He paused. "They found him down by the lake the next morning." Mason immediately asked, "Dead?" Frank nodded. The official report said drowning, but according to Frank, the body had deep cuts on the feet, like he'd been forced to walk barefoot through the forest. That detail made my chest tighten instantly, because of the barefoot man. At that point, we just wanted to leave. But before leaving the property, Mason asked if we could see security footage from the night before. Frank hesitated, then surprisingly agreed. The office had one security camera facing the road leading toward the cabins. The footage was grainy and dark. Around 2:47 a.m., we saw movement, figures emerging from the woods. Not one or two, five people walking barefoot down the road toward Cabin 9, all extremely thin, all moving slowly and strangely. The footage cut out for almost an hour after that. Frank claimed the cameras malfunctioned constantly. Maybe that was true, maybe not. But the footage returned around 4 a.m., and when it did, the road was empty again. No people returning from Cabin 9.
No footprints visible.
Nothing. I asked Frank if he recognized any of them. He said no. Then, after a long pause, he quietly added, "But sometimes people from town talk about squatters living deep in the woods." That should have made me feel better. A real explanation. Except for one thing. The nearest town was over 40 minutes away, and there was no way 5 barefoot people wandered freezing woods in October for fun. Mason and I left immediately afterward. For months we joked about it nervously like it was some insane hillbilly horror movie experience. But then something happened 6 months later that completely destroyed any comforting explanation I had. Mason called me one night sounding genuinely shaken. He told me he'd been scrolling online and found reviews for the cabin property. One review stood out. A woman claimed her husband disappeared there in 2019. Last seen outside Cabin 9 after hearing knocking late at night. Police never found him. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was attached photos. One blurry nighttime picture taken through a cabin window. In the photo, standing between the trees outside, was the same tall barefoot man I saw on our porch, head tilted slightly downward, listening, and behind him, partially hidden in darkness,